So hi everyone. Enjoyed listening to Lewis just now, and he gave me some actually um, ideas on a couple of points to touch on. But we have a couple of updates to give you during the next 15 minutes, and then I think we have 5 minutes for a Q&A at the end. So I'm just gonna share some slides with you. Give me 2 seconds. So what I wanted to cover today was a quick intro on myself and the project. We're going to cover some recent developments and the financial health of the Melon ecosystem, upcoming features, which we're being asked a lot in the last few weeks, and Jack and the Messari guys asked me to also cover some of our recent KPIs. So for those of you who are not aware of the project, I'll give you a quick intro and backstory. So my name is Mona. I co-founded Melonport in 2016, and we were one of the earliest DeFi projects, setting out to deliver a 2-year roadmap for a completely decentralized on-chain asset management protocol. I come traditionally from a finance background. I spent 14 years in traditional finance prior to that. 8 years as a market maker and trader at Goldman, looking after close to $500 million under management. And after that, I moved to work for one of their clients and ran a long-short equity fund. In 2015, I had a very interesting experience where I got poached by a family office who asked me to come and launch a long-short equity strategy for them. They wanted to seed it. And the structure was such that I was able to launch my own fund, and they just wanted to be the seed investor. Now, I thought that was my kind of dream opportunity, and I kind of jumped at the opportunity to have my own fund. So I took it immediately without thinking too much about it. And 2015 was basically one of the worst years of my life, because I went from having worked at really large organizations where operational administrative work is just done for you, and you can just focus on the trading and investing and I guess the more fun aspect. And basically I went from that to like a tiny kind of $30 million AUM fund where you have to do everything yourself. So this was incredibly shocking to me. The most shocking part of it was how inefficient the financial system is today, and how archaic and inefficient the infrastructure is. Like, we're still booking trades in very manual ways, in very kind of labor-intensive ways. And ultimately, we're requiring, there's a need for all these financial intermediaries in the middle, which increase the cost. The financial intermediaries are basically there to ensure and establish trust between investors and managers of funds. So I'm going to touch on that in a second. But ultimately, a year later, I decided that this wasn't working. I wasn't able to focus on investment decisions. I closed down the fund. That's how I got into crypto. I got into crypto shortly after that. And when I started learning about Ethereum, I took the view that it was obvious to me, and hopefully this will materialize, that all assets will eventually be tokenized. I still have very high conviction on that. And if all assets will eventually be tokenized, then we can build a much, much, much more efficient financial infrastructure. And Melon, is the asset management component of that infrastructure. So the way I see DeFi in general, before getting to Melon, is it really just helps establish trust between participants in much more efficient ways. So if you think about DEXs, like, they just help establish protocols or establish trust between buyers and sellers in a way where you don't need a financial intermediary. I saw your message, Jack, but I actually moved away from the slides for a second while I do the intro. The second thing we So exchanges basically help establish trust between DEXs help establish trust between buyers and sellers in a completely automated way without the need for any financial intermediaries. If you look at lending protocols like Compound, they help establish trust between borrowers and lenders without the need for any financial intermediaries. So they essentially automate lending and borrowing protocol. DEXs automate exchange protocol. And you can think of Melon as exactly the same for asset management. We help automate protocol between investors and fund managers. So in the case of asset management, the things that you want to worry about when you're investing in a fund are, let's imagine we're investing into Jack's US equity fund. Basically, as an investor, I care that if Jack tells me his strategy and his track record is in investing in US equities, I want to make sure that if I invest in him, that is all he's going to do. He's going to stick to his specialty. He's not going to go and buy some Venezuelan bonds or even worse, like buy a yacht for his for his own personal use. I want to make sure that he doesn't misappropriate the funds. I want to make sure that he stays within certain risk parameters. I want to make sure that he's not able to take out my money and take it somewhere else, but that he's only able to manage it within certain parameters. I also want to know that if he's charging me, 2% management fee, for example, and a 15% performance fee, that he's going to calculate both the performance of his fund and the fees in an accurate and truthful way. So usually in the financial world, we have fund administrators, custodians, operational staff, a ton of software, a ton of overheads to make sure that those processes exist so that investors can trust their managers. In the DeFi world, we automate all of that with code. So if I do a quick screen share here, I can show you a quick preview of the Melon Terminal. This is what the interface to the Melon protocol looks like right now. I can show you basically a fund that has already been deployed. It basically is very easy to set up, customize your fund by signing a few transactions. It currently takes about 10 to 15 minutes, but in the next release, we'll hopefully have that down to something much, much less than that. Basically, if I look at my fund, this is just a test fund that I set up, TTJ Capital. You can see what assets I'm invested in. You can see my portfolio allocation. You can see the contracts of my fund, manager address, share price, which fees I'm charging to investors, which DEXs I'm connected with, et cetera, et cetera. And you can normally also see your performance in against ETH, DAI, and Bitcoin, but this fund is too new to have much of a track record. And you can navigate the board. The most important tabs to be aware of was if you wanted to invest in a fund or redeem in a fund, you come to the invest redeem page and place your order. If you wanted to trade, you come to the trading page and you have all the direct connectivity to the liquidity pool, DEX order books. We also have a connection to a private market maker, which settles on 0xv3 for larger orders. As a manager, you can also go to your rule set page. And if you wanted to add more rules to increase or reduce your risk profile to investors, you can add things like price tolerance, which basically ensure via smart contract that you cannot trade at a advantageous price to the fund. So it helps you make or prevent innocent errors or even malicious errors. You can define a maximum number of positions. This is useful for people who like to invest in managers that specialize in certain assets. You can define maximum concentration as a percentage of assets under management. This is really useful because traders and investors often lose discipline. So investors typically like to invest in managers that have some kind of restrictions into how big a maximum position can be. We also have the potential to whitelist investors. So not all Melon funds are open and available to anyone. We can also whitelist investors. And if a fund is has selected the whitelisted rule, you can basically copy paste certain Ethereum addresses of people that you permission to invest in your fund. And you can do all sorts of things like perform a KYC AML on the investor before letting them in, for example. And last but not least, you can form asset whitelists and blacklists, which means that if you select a sub-universe of assets here, you can basically say that at any one point, the fund is only allowed to trade in these assets, or the opposite, where the fund is never allowed to trade certain assets. So So this is pretty cool, and it's quite a unique offering that you don't see very often. It's really designed to risk manage as much as possible, and anyone can basically design rule sets, and we can add them to the protocol quite easily. The last page, which is maybe of interest, is just the admin page. This is where you can change investment assets. You can add exchanges as we continue to integrate more DeFi protocols. You can claim fees. So at the end of this fund hasn't been around long enough to accrue many fees, but when it does, you can basically collect your fees just by hitting claim management fee. The accounting is done for you automatically, and you can also gain access to a user-only Telegram channel by signing with your manager key to get in there. So the idea is really that the Melon protocol helps you build a track record. As you can see on the main page, we have a library of all the funds here on the terminal. The terminal is just melon.avantgarde.finance. You can sort them by best performing fund. You can sort them by assets under management. You can make sure you're only looking at the latest protocol version. You can click into any fund that you choose, and you can see a bunch of information about that fund, its performance, its investors, et cetera, et cetera. For those of you who are looking at Melon more from a kind of token holder perspective, monitoring.melon.network is kind of how we track usage on the network, and we'll get to metrics and KPIs later. But just to let you know that monitoring.melon.network is basically how to measure kind of slice and dice data of any sorts on managers, funds, investors, asset universe. Even you can see here, for example, after Ether and Bitcoin, Kyber network is the third most held token in aggregate on the network. So just some interesting little metrics that you can play around with and explore on your own time. One of the key things about Melon that I just want to get across, aside from its functionality, is who we target and who we want to serve. We are absolutely not interested in servicing a Fidelity or a BlackRock or a Goldman Sachs. We couldn't care less about them as users. We are there to service the small to medium-sized managers. We're there to help provide transparency and recognition and visibility to talented managers who normally wouldn't get visibility, and until now have never had the chance to gain visibility in such a way. The track record is published on the blockchain. The track record of every fund is published on chain once every 24 hours. So it's auditable, verifiable, and transparent for anyone looking to invest. And as these track records get longer and longer, they become much more valuable and much easier to monetize. So hopefully you have a little bit of a introduction to what Melon is. So maybe now we'll just kind of move on to, I think my slides are in the wrong order, but that's fine, into the next section that I was asked to speak about. So people were asking about the financial health of the Melon ecosystem. And so I decided that we should cover it in this slide. So so there's two aspects that I really want to talk about with regards to the financial health of the ecosystem. The first is we did have a very tough year last year because the Melon token price collapsed in price. And obviously, for those of you who understand and are aware of our tokenomics, the way it works is Melon is a buy and burn token. That means that the usage on the network is directly linked to the value of the token. So what that means is token holders are incentivized if the network grows in terms of users. It means that maintainers and developers who earn in Melon token are incentivized if they do good work on the network. But ultimately, what we found is if the token price crashes, then very, very quickly you can have an ecosystem which is not very well funded. So we looked back at last year, and one of the, I guess, mistakes we made as a DAO, as a council, was the first grant that we gave was in liquid Melon tokens, and the project that we granted to was in the early stages had no kind of restrictions in terms of how they could and couldn't sell the token. And for a token that's not very liquid, and for a year that tokens in general were all under pressure, I think that this was a mistake in hindsight, and we resurrected that later in the year with future tranche payments. But what it also made us recognize is that we need to get smarter as a DAO at how we give grants, in terms of making, in the early days of a network, making a grant or giving a grant in tokens to a project, and that grant being the main financial incentive that the project has to stay alive, is not very good for a number of reasons. It puts pressure on the tokens. It creates a kind of desperate seller mentality, and it doesn't align incentives the way we want it to. Ideally, we want builders to be able to hold on to the Melon token and therefore benefit from the value that they are helping create. Avant-Garde Finance, by the way, is my new company, and we are now the lead developer of the Melon protocol, executing on a 3-year roadmap. We were the second project to make a proposal to the DAO, and we kind of learned from that mistake and asked or proposed ourselves that the tokens be locked up on a 2 to 5 year vesting schedule, and that was indeed kind of executed, and so essentially we are self-funded. We are self-funding ourselves in fiat currency and aiming to hold the Melon tokens for the long term, because we believe we can drive and create that value through usage, through feature additions, and through increasing the asset universe and a bunch of other things, which I'll touch on at the end. So that problem ultimately, so the first thing is, like, we've managed to, at least in the short to medium term, alleviate, or the plan is to alleviate the pressure from new supply coming to the market by making sure that any granted tokens are vested. Because we believe that it will take time for DeFi to scale. And until DeFi scales, we want to make sure that ultimately, otherwise you have markets which are unidirectional, and there's mainly sellers, but you need to have the buyers, the users basically coming in to offset that supply. And we've managed to kind of solve that problem for the short to medium term, and probably will be publishing some thoughts on it in the coming weeks. So that's the token side. And then at Avant-Garde specifically, so we, as I mentioned, are the lead developer, and we are self-funded. So obviously COVID environment was an environment we had to react fast to, because we had thought we would raise a round at some point this year. And so to make our cash last for as long as possible, what we did in March this year was to restructure our cost base very aggressively. And this prolonged our runway and puts us in a position where now we can pretty much deliver the entire roadmap without the need to source any external funding. So financial health, in summary, is very good. And so the next subject that we're going to talk about is KPIs and metrics, I think. Or no, first we'll do KPIs and metrics. So basically, so we talked about the project, we talked about the financial health of the project, and now let's talk about KPIs. So you'll notice that on this chart, I only show KPIs from February this year onwards, even though we have been on the mainnet for well over a year now. The reason I do that is because when we went to mainnet in February 2019, the UX of our interface, the desktop app that we had to interface with the protocol, was very, very hard to use and basically put a lot of people off. So ultimately, we didn't see many users at all, hardly any growth. And apart from the one blip when we first released, that was basically it. So when we came back in October to start delivering on the roadmap, one of the very, very important focuses we have now is to make the UX, UI as seamless as possible for the user. And in February, the first release was made to that effect. It's the Melon Terminal. There's a blog on our Medium page all about that, but I gave you a quick preview tour about the terminal earlier. The terminal was probably a 10x improvement from the desktop app. It's now browser-based and much, much easier, smoother to use. The release will have in Q3 this year is also going to be a big improvement from a UX perspective. So we're getting there. And what was nice is that we saw also a very big jump in growth since the release, and that seems to be sustainable so far. We've only been 3.5 months on the mainnet with this particular release. And you can see here that the growth numbers for number of funds have gone up, with a big jump in February to March, up 37%, up 9.9, up 9.4. Investments, the number of investments has been growing quite strongly. And very, very notably, and something we're very excited about, AUM inflows in terms of ETH terms has started to show some big tick ups as well. So in the beginning, we only saw February, March, April. We saw mild increases. For the month April, May, we saw a 50.6% increase. And this pink column, it's not very accurate data because it's not the end of the month, and it was taken last night, including pending investment requests. Some of them were not executed, but you can see that tracking for May, June, we have a 40.5% AUM increase, and this is all in ETH terms. So the KPIs, I'm very happy with the direction they're going in. I hope they continue this way, and I'm confident that as we come out with easier to use interfaces and a lot more features, that the numbers will continue to show show up really nicely in these kind of KPIs. So the last point of the presentation is just so what is our focus going forward? Where are we spending our time? So there is a public roadmap available online for anyone who wants to see it. And you can ask me if you can't find it. But basically, we're seeing two key areas where people want to, from our users, we're getting a lot of feedback on two particular areas. The first is making sure that we're dramatically increasing the asset universe. So people want to start transferring their portfolios to a Melon fund and building that track record. But if we're missing one or two tokens that they would typically like to trade, then this basically makes it hard for them to do so. So we're working on increasing the asset universe, and we're there are certain challenges involved with that, and we're working hard to resolve them. The second big focus for us is integration of other DeFi protocols. So when we first set out, there weren't that many DeFi protocols. Today we have an explosion of DeFi protocols, which makes the potential of Melon even more exciting. So any DEX that we're not integrated with, figuring out batch orders so that we can improve price execution for users. Integration with lending protocols is something we're working on right now. Being able to invest in assets other than just plain vanilla and interest-bearing tokens like liquidity pools or derivative products, and leveraging flash loans are also examples of features that we'll be including and making available to Melon users. So stay tuned. There's a lot happening, and that's pretty much it, I think, from me. I think we'll stop now and take any questions if there are any.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we're actually a little bit over time, but if you could just let people know where to find you, and then if anyone has any questions, drop them in the chat. But great seeing you, Mona. It was an awesome presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so contact details, you can contact us on Telegram. It's the Melonport, the old Melonport channel. You can also contact me on Twitter, either the Melon Protocol one or my personal one, and I'll make sure either I or someone else gets back to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Jack. Take care.